my soul, telling me we better get out. Oh, but try as I might, I can't get up and go. Oh, Betty, my darling, what now? Betty, won't you tell me what's wrong, my dear? Why do I feel like my mind is gone? Oh, the lights down the White Mountain Range, I fear they're never gonna leave us alone. When I talk, I'm going to keep it on me.
Makes a lot of sense.
When you talk, I'm going to put it on you.
Maybe bring
Technology,
it back to you.
It's speaking of technology, you got any updates on technology?
Well, this is a real minor simulation moment, but just yesterday, the day before, there's a guy from my gym that I was like, next time I see him, I'm going to talk to him about financial planning. He's a financial advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I don't know if he's the guy to talk to or not about that sort of thing, but I'm going to ask him.
That's what he does. So.
Well, yeah, but I just thought maybe he does like corporate stuff or something.
Or like, yeah, I guess, you meet a lawyer and he's like, well, I'm actually a CPA, but I'm also a lawyer.
Right, yeah, that sort of thing. I don't know if he helps dudes like me plan for things like I want to plan for. And then, like less than 2 minutes later, he's driving down the other way on the road. And I never see that guy out anywhere but the gym, which is nowhere near my house.
Mm-hmm.
So I just was like, that's weird. I was just thinking about that guy. I just made him appear. I haven't talked to him yet, but anyway.
It's weird to think about. Maybe you did make him appear.
I think maybe I did.
I don't know. Updates from since last podcast. I was thinking that would be kind of a fun thing to do, like a simulation story update, like on a regular thing.
Last time we talked about it, I couldn't think of anything, and I think a lot of times we're looking for like these giant glaring events, but those type where you go, I was just thinking about that guy, and then he just showed up.
It seems like a lot of those happen.
Yeah.
Like you think about somebody and then they call you and you're like, that's odd. I haven't talked to them in like a year.
Yeah.
And then I had a buddy that we pretty regularly did that because we wouldn't talk very often.
Mm-hmm.
Be like, I'd call him like once a year, but it would always be like, he'd be like, that's so weird. I was thinking about giving you a call today and checking in. But
Oprah says thoughts have wings.
Which Oprah?
The Oprah.
The Chunky Years Oprah or the...
this would have been Oprah 20 years ago.
I had a buddy who's always said that. He would always call her the Oprah in the Chunky Years.
Well, what would Oprah be like late 90s?
Those are the Chunky Years.
Okay. This is that Oprah.
So that's back when
Probably a happier Oprah.
Yeah, she had to interview people that, it wasn't, she was even interviewing like the our kind of people, like the ufologists and stuff, like she wasn't Tom Cruise yet.
Yeah, I don't know. She was pretty regular stuff at that time. But yeah, everybody's getting t-shirts.
God, it's such a weird, I don't know her, but she's a weird character. Like I went to St. Lucia and like years ago, and we were staying right down the beach from her like mansion in St. Lucia. It was like you could walk to her beachfront, but there was like guards that wouldn't let you go past it on the beach. And insanely, I say strange and just like odd, like kind of like Michael Jackson or Elvis Presley, like just hugely successful. But if you stop and you just kind of look at him for a second, you kind of go, that's a very strange person.
Is she a Scientologist?
Probably. I mean, I don't know that. I don't know for sure.
I mean, not in the way that like a Leah Remini or Tom Cruise, they're like publicly
Scientology,
retired
we have to
psychologist.
podcast about that. There are so many hooks and like just crazy stories connected with Scientology.
I think it's top of mind because Friedman just had a Scientologist guy on, and so I'm starting to look into
Like somebody
it a
who
little more.
was a Scientologist and now they're out of it.
An educator, somebody that's out of it. Yeah.
I listened to a story about Jack Parsons. You know who Jack Parsons is? So Jack Parsons, we're going to have to do a podcast on him because it's so insane. He is like the godfather of our rocket program in the U.S. space program. And if you look at that guy's life, it is just bonkers. Like he was connected with L. Ron Hubbard.
Okay.
And so he's in Diana Polska's book about American Cosmic when she's talking about creativity and the idea of belief systems and how they play a role in, you know, what you do. He's one of her examples because like you don't have to believe anything that he was doing. She's just saying like if you asked him what his belief system was and like where did he develop these formulas and these ideas to develop these rockets that NASA couldn't come up with and the Russians couldn't come up with. And his process was go out into the desert with L. Ron Hubbard and Huxley and a bunch of other odd people and perform these occult Satanist rituals, taking drugs, and then somehow something's downloaded into your brain and there you go, there's your rocket program.
This explains so much. Like I often find myself wondering why I haven't developed any rockets.
It's you're not a Satanist
My
on
process
LSD.
is
If you
all
were,
wrong.
your process is all wrong. It sounds so strange to say it, but if you go and you research his life, you go, well, that's what he was doing. Like, and if you look at interviews with him, like where he thought these ideas were coming from, where he thought, I mean, it's just, it's really far out there stuff. And so the L. Ron Hubbard thing it's so bizarre because L. Ron Hubbard like ripped him off. Like they were like doing Scientology stuff together. It was kind of before he started Scientology. And then he basically talked him into giving him his fortune. L. Ron Hubbard just takes like $400,000 of his money and just buys a yacht and just takes off. And then there's this weird story where it's like he takes off with like his wife's sister who he had an affair with before.
L. Ron Hubbard took off with
Jack Parsons' wife's sister, who Jack Parson had a relationship with before, and when she was probably underage. And so at some point, Jack Parsons like, I'm going to have you arrested if you don't bring my money back, blah, blah, blah. And L. Ron Hubbard.
He didn't say, I'm going to have you arrested if you don't bring my sister-in-law back.
Yeah, no, he didn't care about her. He just wanted the money. And then the sister-in-law is like, threatens him, like, if you go to the police, I'm going to tell them that, you know, about your relationship with me when I was a minor. And then they end up going, fine, whatever, just settle. And L. Ron Hubbard gives him like $5,000 and calls it a day. But it's just bizarre. Like,
yeah, that is bizarre.
And L. Ron Hubbard had like a long, like he was a con man. Like that's what he would do. He would just, and he did that, like there's been movies made about it, but yeah, he would talk people out of their fortunes and then use it to buy yachts and go around. I don't know. That's a podcast for another day.
Yeah, I want to do a little deep dive into L. Ron Hubbard at this point. I mean, I know
it's not the subject of this podcast, but
sorry.
You could probably connect him to a lot of the funny business of the 20th century. You'll find some sort of connection to L. Ron Hubbard.
It is crazy, and it is a little bit of earlier we were talking a little bit about spirituality in the 70s. People kind of like on this big search, and guys like that could really capitalize on lost people. You know?
They could, but also the weird thing is, sometimes it works. Sometimes you get a Tom Cruise.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes you get a Jack Parsons.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get, that's kind of the point of Diana's book is whether or not you believe that they're being communicated with aliens from some off-world entity, they believe they are, and they are coming up with, another example she uses was a famous Indian mathematician that I can't remember his name, but it's, he's a very famous mathematician, and he came up with these math equations that were just revolutionary. I think he won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Is it possibly Srinivasa Ramanujan?
See, even with it in front of you, you can't really say it. But that sounds right.
I don't think I could have done any better.
When people would ask him where he came up with these equations that mathematicians had racked their brains over for centuries, he would say that there's some Hindu goddess that he would whisper them in his ear. That would be his explanation, that this Hindu goddess whispered them in my ear. That was his, and it sounds kind of like fun, I guess. But then when you stop and think about it, you go, wait a minute, are you serious? Like you were sitting in a room and this goddess showed up and whispered those formulas in your ear and then you just wrote it down? He would say, yeah, that's exactly how it happened. And then you think, well, that's pretty strange. But those formulas add up. See what I did there?
Oh, yeah. Nice one.
So today...
It's just funny if you want more on that, just Google literally famous Indian mathematician. It's the first guy that comes
Does it have
up.
anything about the goddess that he said gave him the formulas?
He had almost no formal training in pure mathematics.
Yeah, that was the other side of the story. It's so strange that he almost came out of nowhere, just like Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons flunked out of Caltech. He was kicked out because he kept blowing stuff up in the lab. And then he goes on to like really blow stuff up all the way out into space. And then he ended up blowing himself up because I think one of his rockets went bad when he was like in his 30s. So,
well,
you play with rockets long enough.
I don't feel like that has anything to do with him not having a lot of like technical knowledge. I feel like you said, the odds are just with every rocket you play with, you're getting closer to the one.
Yeah, I like, there's so many stories about, there was a really good podcast with Eric Weinstein was on Rogan recently. I don't know if you listened to that one. We talk about Rogan all the time.
Not that specific one, yeah.
But he's talking about like great scientists versus good scientists. And to be a great scientist, you kind of have to be a cowboy. You have to be willing to be completely wrong. You have to be willing to be made a fool.
Yeah.
And some of the greatest scientists, like Carey Mullis is one that he talks about, that I've like listened to lectures with Carey Mullis for years, and he invented the
telephone?
Telephone.
Nope.
PCR. It's a DNA replicating process that we use in like everything now. Okay. But he's an example of this kind of belief system thing that Diana writes about, is that he was on acid when he came up with this idea. Like he's a hippie and he's like this far out, chemistry professor, and everybody told him his idea about it was wrong. And he was just like, no, I can do it. Let me show you. And then he did it and he won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. And if you listen to lectures of him talking about it, he's pretty open about like his process. And it's just, he's an out there kind of guy. And, how exactly he came up with the right answer, I don't know. It's a mysterious thing.
Get out to the desert.
It's like writing a hit song and you just, like you said, Tom Petty just kind of
waits for it to come down.
Comes down. It's like an antenna. But speaking of that song, at the beginning of this, we'll play, so you will have heard it already, the Ballad of Betty and Barney Hill, which is the subject of today's podcast. So going back to my thing, simulation moments. Let's do that. Anytime either of us has a simulation moment, we'll just share that with you guys so that you keep up to date. This was a pretty insane. It's hard to beat that Obama's making a movie about the same subject as the song. That's pretty crazy. But then we released the song on YouTube this last week. It'd be out on Spotify and all that on March 28th. But the day that I released it, I just happened to be friends with my friend Gentry, who's probably listening. Gentry, thank you so much. She's just this cool UFO personality that is, and she's into UFOs, and she's a lot like me, I guess, in that way. Like, we're weirdos. We like this world. We live in this world. And I knew that she happened to have met Betty Hill's niece at some point, Kathleen Marden. And so I texted Gentry and just said, I'd love for her to hear this song if you can forward her this link to the YouTube. And I said it so like an old person, to the YouTube. And
could you please mail her a link?
Can you mail her direct her to the YouTube so she can listen to the song?
www.youtube.
And that same day that we released the song, she was like, "Oh yeah, I'll just group text her right now and tell her about it." And I was like, "Oh yeah, go ahead." And she did. And then Kathleen was texting me back about it and saying, "Oh, I love the song. It's the best, version of that story she's heard." And to me, it was just, that's awesome. That's amazing that she hears a song about her aunt and uncle. And also but then that moment, it's like, did that just happen?
Yeah.
Did that really just happen? It's pretty strange that I would know Gentry, that Gentry would know her, that they would be connected. And then she'd be like, that day that we released it, she's texting me about the song.
When you text me about the exchange, I kind of dismissed it. Like, I must have read that wrong. So today when you asked, like, did you see I text with Barney Hill or with Betty Hill's niece? I was like, yeah, I did see that. I didn't actually like think about it and go like the person we're talking about here.
Yeah. The Betty Hill.
It's the niece. So is that the niece who is the daughter of the sister who had seen? Yes. Who had a UFO sighting?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, from reading a little bit, it looks
So she was there,
like
she remembers Betty and Barney coming back from the experience and telling everybody about it and being freaked out. And like, I think she's written a book about it, and she's spoken a lot about it, but she's given interviews, and she's like, she was a kid at the time and she remembers it. And it's pretty wild. I mean, so let's get into the story, and you guys will love this one. This is, like I said on the last podcast, there are two men in the world who are obsessed with the Betty and Barney Hill story so much that they would create great works of art to tell the story and to get it out there. I'm one of those men. Barack Obama is the other man. Hopefully one of these days we'll meet and we'll sit down, put all of our political differences aside, and talk about UFOs. That would be, if that happens, that's how you're in a simulation. You'll know it.
Yeah.
If a year from now we're having a conversation and that happens, then you'll go, okay. Well,
what if Barack is just up here in your upstairs room? And I'm kind of irritated because he's in my seat. That'd be something.
That would be something else.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He'd watch you fool with the cameras.
At that point, I think I'd bring in a producer. At that point, we'll find somebody to run the switcher. But so why don't you kick us off with the Wikipedia rundown of the story of Betty and Barney Hill, and then from there we'll kind of dissect it, and
I will give a pretty brief summary, and then if there's anything you want me to call out, I can dive into a little bit more specific details. But Betty and Barney Hill lived in New Hampshire, and they took a vacation up towards Niagara Falls.
1961, right?
Yep. So late in September of 1961, they decided to come back home. So as they're driving home around 10:30 at night on September 20th, they see Betty starts to notice some lights in the sky. And Barney is pretty dismissive of it at first. Kind of says, well, that's either some constellation you're not familiar with, or airplane or something like that. But Betty kind of persists and says, no, there's something to that. So at some point they pull over, let the dog out, and they start watching a little more. And then at some point in here it says Barney was pretty sure it was just a large aircraft, until the lights made like a steep decline at a speed that was not consistent with something you'd see out of like an airliner.
Okay.
So they get back in the car, keep making their way home, and Betty continues to keep monitoring these lights. And
As they drive
occasionally-
through the White Mountain Range.
correct,
That's-
yeah, they're near Franconia. Let's see, where is it? I said I got to be sure and get that right. No, I don't have it. Back.
I think that's right. Franconia.
Franconia Notch. Yeah.
Franconia Notch.
Yeah, so you're right. They're going through, let's see. Betty continues to monitor it. And then at some point they pull over to watch it again. At which point they see this thing's getting closer and closer. It gets down to approximately 100 feet in the air. And Barney's looking up at it through his binoculars, and he can see what he calls humanoid figures, somewhere between 8 and 11 of them. And a few of those figures go to the back wall of this flying saucer and start throwing switches and levers, which he perceives as like they're going to be coming down to get him. And one of the figures locks eyes with Barney from the, driver's seat of the ship. And from the way Barney explains it, it's the captain of the ship is telepathically telling him, "Stay where you are. We're coming to get you."
Oh gosh.
So Barney gets back in the car and gets moving. And he's telling Betty, like, I think they're after us. And they're trying to make it, you're going down this curvy mountain road. They're trying to get away and evade a spaceship.
And don't they see it following them as they're going? Like they can keep looking up and they're seeing it's moving with them.
It's gaining on them.
Yeah.
At some point, it gets close enough to where they start hearing like a beeping noise. I think one of the descriptions of it was kind of like if your trunk were left open, and then there's like a vibration in the car, sort of like if you hit a tuning fork and then put it up against your body, that sort of a thing. And then as far as the account goes, they lose they kind of go into this sort of daze, semi-conscious state, and really start to kind of come to about 35 miles down the road, at which point they pull over and they see just an orange blast of light, and that's what they think is this spaceship taking off. They go ahead and finish the drive home, and they get home 2, maybe 3 hours later than they expected. They expected to get home somewhere around 2 a.m. They get home right around dawn. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're tired. Not only was it a long drive, but they had this weird thing happen. Sleep it off a little bit, and then get up the next morning and kind of debrief on the situation. Betty finds that her dress that she was wearing is torn. Barney finds that his shoes that, a couple spots that I was reading, he's
like the tops of his shoes.
His shoes were scuffed.
Shoes were scuffed up, but in a weird place. Like they were like his feet had been dragged.
Okay.
And his feet might have been behind him.
Okay.
And like the tops of his shoes were all
his shoes
scuffed.
were scuffed up. There's a comment in the Wikipedia, and more than one account I heard was that he was a snappy dresser. Which I guess the significance of that is that, if my son said, "Oh, Dad, my shoes are scuffed up," I'd be like, well, they've probably been that way for months.
Mm-hmm.
And
but he
just
would
now.
notice.
But somebody that is a little more aware of their appearance is going to notice if their nice shoes are scuffed up. So that is the encounter on, September 19th/20th. And yeah, you're right. Kathleen, the niece that we've been talking about, has a little bit of a blog post describing the overhearing the phone call.
Oh yeah, can you read that?
Yeah, I'll read a little bit of that. Let's see.
I've heard this before, but I don't remember exactly what she says.
And
so as you're looking for that, I think too, like originally, did they not remember much of the encounter? Like originally they just remember what you described, which was this light taking off and then them going back home. And it wasn't until later when they were getting some counseling about this, because it was disturbed Barney quite a bit.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden they had these memories coming back to them that there a lot more had happened than just they saw it.
Yeah, it's Barney doesn't seem to me that Barney had a lot of memories coming back. It was more Betty had about 10 days after this event. Mm-hmm. So, you're getting into early October of 1961. Betty starts having these weird, pretty lucid dreams of,
going on the ship, meeting these people.
Right.
Okay, we can get into that side of it.
So this is just an excerpt from Kathleen Martin's blog describing the afternoon of September 20th. So this is the afternoon after Barney and Betty had gotten back from their drive from
pretty
Night
fresh.
Hill. So
fresh
this is
in the memory.
This is the day after the drive. She said, I had to ride home from school on the afternoon of September 20th, anticipating a social visit with my mother before I did my afternoon chores. Again, Kathleen's mother being Betty Hill's sister, who reportedly had a UFO sighting not long before this. I mean, whether that's months or years, but fairly recent history. This day, my mom was preoccupied with a phone call from her sister, Betty Hill. It was not the typical conversation that I was accustomed to hearing. There was a concern over possible contamination from the, quote, flying saucer that had hovered over their 1957 Chevy Bel Air the previous night when they were traveling through the New Hampshire's White Mountain region. Flying saucer, aliens, I was completely unaware that life existed on other planets. On this day, my life changed forever.
As it should.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And she was texting me the other day.
Yeah, this same woman.
I know.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
It's a simulation.
And then it goes on to say, I text Dante about this all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His song is the best alien abduction song I've ever heard in my entire life.
I was just telling Barack how great the song is.
It'll be on the soundtrack to the film next year.
Yep.
Okay.
Not all of that's in the blog. You can read it for yourself.
Yeah,
most of that is, though.
Most read between the lines,
Yeah. There's a lot. It's implicit. Yeah.
Yeah. So then after that, at some point they contact the local Air Force base, don't they, to report it?
That's right.
Yeah.
September 21. So we're talking, 19th, they're driving home in the evening. So the evening of the 19th, they have this encounter with a UFO. The afternoon of the 20th is when we hear Kathleen Martin's account of getting home and hearing Betty talking to her sister on the phone. 21st, Betty telephones Pease Air Force Base to report their UFO encounter.
And they sent people out to investigate, didn't they?
Yeah, it looks like on the 22nd, so the day after they've called the Air Force Base, Major Paul Henderson telephoned the Hills for a more detailed interview. The Air Force's looks like the Air Force's stance on this at this time was kind of just, there's not really sufficient data. They probably just got confused and it was probably just aircraft. Or a lot of people I think they thought that the Hills were seeing Jupiter.
Yeah.
And just got mixed up.
Jupiter and Venus both move so much in the sky that not most, I mean, that's what they want you to believe, but most UFO sightings, or a lot of times, I mean, I had a buddy once call me, even just recently, I think Venus was really close to the moon, and he's a very sober guy, and he was called me out of nowhere. I'm not even close with him either. He just knew I was into UFOs, and he's like, man, you step outside and look at the moon right now. I'm like, all right, go out there. And it was weird because Venus was very close to the moon. It's so close that it can look like it's almost moving. And it does create, when it's close to the horizon or when it's close to trees or close to the moon, it's really weird to look at it for some reason. But if you really stare at it, you get for a while and you pick a point on the horizon, then you realize it's not moving.
Yeah.
But if you just look at it on its own, you might think it is.
That's interesting to hear you say that, because one of the skeptic rebuttals I heard while I was looking into this was, if you're on a sailboat and you look up at something like that, and I think he was referring specifically to Jupiter, he was saying it can give you the appearance that it's moving, but
because you're constantly
on
moving.
A boat that's rocking with waves and whatnot, and so I think probably as the Air Force is looking into this,
because you're driving in a car, similar kind of reaction.
And we're talking curvy mountain roads, changing evolution, and possibly you're you're changing from north to east to west, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
and then obviously doing that, you're gonna rip your dress and scuff up your shoes, and then that happens too because of the bumpy car
All the time. Yeah, that it was interesting. Some of the skeptical hole poking that I heard, I would be really on board with, like that, going, well, it's not like she's like an astrologer or anything like that. And
no, they were both very sober people.
Right.
They were actually, another point is they were an interracial couple, which was odd at that time, not very common. And they were both, I think, pretty involved in the civil rights movement.
Right. Yeah. They're actual like board members of the NAACP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
she's a social worker. So I would imagine she's, particularly at that time, probably relatively progressive.
And also not wacky people. Like they weren't, anyone that knew them, they weren't, if I told you that happened to me, you'd go, well, it kind of makes sense because it's Dante. You know what I mean? Versus these other people.
Yeah, it's hard to gauge. I mean, I'm thinking like my dad in the 60s in Oklahoma probably would have thought they were wacky. But my dad, again, he's in Oklahoma in the Midwest. So like, they're members of a Unitarian church. They're an interracial couple in the 60s, but they're not far from Boston.
Yeah.
East Coast, I'm sure they're like not near as out there as people in the Midwest would think of them in the 60s.
Well, I think there's going to be out there people wherever you go. It's just, in their case, there's no evidence that they were involved in any kind of UFO movements or any kind of, like, if this was, I mean, it did come out of nowhere. It seemed like the people that knew them too kind of said that, like, they weren't UFO people except for the sister thought she had seen one. But even in that case, I don't think she was involved in like ufology or that world or anything. Yeah,
no, you're right. All accounts, as far as I know of, are they're pretty regular, upstanding citizens.
He was a mailman, wasn't he?
Yeah, at least he worked for the post office graveyard shift, but I don't know that he carried the mail.
Okay.
He did at some point. There's a picture of him putting mail in a mailbox in like a post uniform. So, but if you're working graveyard shift, I don't think you're not a black guy walking around neighborhoods in the 60s.
Probably
going
not.
House to house. People don't.
It was a different time.
Yeah.
But so at what point did they get medical attention or seek some sort of medical?
So like you said,
because they were confused for a while. They were like truly trying to work out in their mind what exactly happened. A couple weeks later,
she starts having these dreams. She's journaling about them, keeping a diary of these dreams. It looks like, she's having she and Barney both are talking with folks from their church about this from time to time, friends and family, that sort of thing. And then at some point, somebody recommends like, hey, why don't you go talk to somebody about this? Because it sounds like Barney in particular
Barney was really
kind of troubled by this.
There's actually a movie. I'd have to look up the name of it because it's not Betty and Barney Hill. It's something different, like Encounter or something like that. But it was made in the early 70s about this. And it was actually one of James Earl Jones' first films. He plays Barney Hill.
All right.
And he's fantastic in it. It's not a great movie. It's pretty low budget production. But he, as an actor, like he's the best. And he does play... It was an emotional experience for Barney, I think, because I think I've listened to interviews with Betty later in life, and she said to her it was a profound experience. She was excited about it. She was like, "This is amazing. I'm meeting these people from another planet, and they're coming to talk to us." But because Barney was such a big guy, they did something to him to sedate him or to like control him. And so to him, he was kind of taken against his will to be a part of this.
Yeah.
And to her, she was conscious of the whole experience, according to her. And she voluntarily went with them to talk with them, to like to have this experience. So I think that's why they had such a different reaction to it, because he felt like this was a real violation of his privacy and his just his it was like being kidnapped, even though I don't think they did anything to him. And in her experience, it was more like, no, everything's fine. She kind of even understood why, because he was so much bigger than them, why you would, he would never let anybody, push him around or, make him do something he didn't want to do, So anyway, when do they get, so they go to the church, they have a psychiatrist at some point.
It looks
so they
like,
go see.
I mean, I remember this jumping out at me when I was looking through this before, but I mean, it's not until March of 1963 that Betty and Barney Hill go public and discuss the UFO encounter with the group at their church. So we're talking a year and a half later. And then you fast forward, the Hills first met Dr. Simon, who's the hypnotist, December 14th, 1963. So it's 2 years after this encounter that they go in for this hypnosis. You good?
You're good. I'm just checking the cameras and making sure we're still rolling. We're good. Battery's on.
So yeah, Simon began hypnotizing the Hills on January 4th, 1964. He hypnotized Betty and Barney several times each, and the sessions lasted until June 6th, 1964. So looks like, Betty and Barney meet Dr. Simon late 1963, but they don't actually begin the hypnotisms until early 1964. So I mean, this is a pretty long stretch of time.
It's in those sessions though that she really starts to piece together some of her memories, right?
Yeah, it sounds like the dreams that she had, like it wasn't like night one she had, chapter one of the memory, when they go on the ship. The dreams kind of came out of order, and then they placed them in chronological order throughout some of these hypnosis sessions.
And so in the dreams, she's remembering. So what happened that was more than just what their initial memory was,
right?
That they landed and there was somebody in the road,
right,
and other men behind them, and they ended up going with them onto the ship.
Right. So yeah, you're right. So up until these hypnosis sessions, the account is just that they had been on the road, they saw some lights, they may or may not have been pursued by this ship. There was some beeping, there was some vibration. They were in a daze. They kind of lost about 35 miles in 2 hours of time. And then they went home and they were a little weirded out, and dress was torn, boots are scuffed. It's not until we get into these public, discussion and hypnosis sessions that we get deeper into, the actual interaction with these beings.
Yeah, and you can look up interviews with her later in life where she talks a lot about what exactly happened, and it's pretty wild. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it's covered in the movie too, but it's like they basically went on their ship. They took Barney into one room. She went into another room. They were doing some tests on them. Mm-hmm. And the one of them, the leader, there's only one that could speak English. And it was like, she described it as like, he was speaking English like somebody who didn't speak English as a first language. And it was like broken, but his accent was completely foreign to her. She could, like, if you'd heard somebody French speaking English, you could kind of, if you heard a German speaking English, it was like that, except his accent was like just something weird that she couldn't recognize. Mm-hmm. And their language that they spoke to one another, she couldn't understand. But that he spoke enough to communicate with her, but not like clearly. Like if you went to a country and somebody was like, I kind of speak English, kind of like if you ever go to France and you tell them, do you speak English? They'll say, no, until you try to speak French to them. And then all of a sudden they'll say, actually, I do speak English. And then they just can't stand to hear you butcher their language. I've actually done that. It's totally true. Like
French.
Just ask them, speak English? No. All right. I mean, just say oui, oui. And they'll be like, no, I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Why don't you watch me butcher your language for a minute?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably a lot more painful to hear an American butcher French than to hear a Frenchman butcher English.
An Oklahoman American.
It ain't pretty.
Yeah.
So when she's on when she's interacting with them, though, there was a lot of things that happened that, like, they showed her a map of where they were from, I guess. And they even gave her a book.
Right.
Because she was saying that she was very excited about this. She was like, my friends are going to want to know about this. Like, you need to give me something that I can show them so that they believe this story. And initially, the one leader that had been communicating with her gave her a book and said, "This, you can take this back. This is from our planet." And she said it was a language she didn't recognize, but also the way that it was written was more like Chinese writing, like it was vertical
like
instead of horizontal, and it was like hieroglyphs and not. It didn't look anything like what she had seen before, and she said that was one of the most disappointing things, because then when they're leaving, right before she's about to leave, they all get into an argument about something, and she doesn't really know what it is. And then he comes.
You say they, you mean like these aliens? You know, the group of what they call grays. Sometimes, like the group of these aliens kind of pull the leader to the side, and from what she can gather, the aliens are kind of like, "Hey, man, you're not going to send her with the book, are you?"
Yeah.
And then the leader said, "Well, she asked for a."
Come on, she's been
souvenir.
so nice. Yeah. She's a sweet lady. It's Betty. Just give her the book.
Yeah, just give her the book. And she wants to show her friends. And the guys in the alien group are like, that's exactly
why you shouldn't give it to her.
Exactly. So then, you're right. The leader comes back over sheepishly to Betty, and he's like, I'm going to need that book back.
Remember I said I can't do it.
And I'm picturing like a woman in that situation being like, well, I thought you were the leader. Yeah.
Do you always let them talk to you like that? Is that they just tell you what to do, huh? Is that how it goes? Okay. Yeah.
Well, here's
Spaceman.
your stupid book back. I want
She
some.
throws it at him. Fine.
This isn't the leader's
Get
book.
off my planet.
Yeah.
You jerk.
So funny. You're right. I heard some audio of her recounting giving the book back. She was really disappointed.
Yeah. I mean, she felt like, she wanted it, but also like she couldn't explain herself then. Yeah. Which, who knows?
Let's get into Barney's hypnosis sessions.
Okay. So anyway, that kind of buttons up Betty's interpretation of what happened. I think we covered most everything. No, we didn't cover, like, didn't they do, like, they did tests to them when they were on there.
Yeah, so...
I mean, the torn dress and...
they couldn't figure out the zipper was one detail that I thought was pretty funny. Just that, they're trying to, do kind of regular physical exam type stuff. They're looking at her nose and her ears and her mouth. And
they even had some sort of device that she didn't recognize. Didn't it tell her if they could tell she wasn't pregnant or something like that?
The thing that jumps out in a lot of these stories is that they poke something in her belly button. And her interpretation was that they were checking out fertility of some kind, or, looking to see if she was pregnant. And then there's another account where she says that they come in with Barney's dentures.
Oh, yeah. They didn't understand what they were.
So apparently Barney's in the next room getting checked out.
Because he had been hit in the face he was in the military.
Yeah.
Something happened to him in the military where he was, I don't know if it was a grenade or like something happened where I think he lost teeth, which is why he had dental work. She
said that she had to explain to these aliens, like, well, as we get older, we lose our teeth. It's fairly common for people to have dentures, like... And then they were tugging on her teeth, trying to figure out. So, her examination was pretty straightforward, aside from getting a needle jabbed into your stomach. I mean, that part isn't real pleasant, but you're right. Her account of it is usually the tone of it's kind of, oh yeah, well, they looked at my ears and they looked at my nose, and and then they asked me about the dentures. They were kind of confused about that, but it was not so bad. They tore my dress.
That's what really wasn't nice. But then Barney,
meanwhile,
in the other room, Barney's getting God knows what done to him. taking his teeth out. He's in a trance the whole time, and and he's with the not nice guys. So she's with the one that speaks English and seems to be really pleasant. He's with the guys that wouldn't give us the book. So,
yeah, listening to some of the interviews of him, not the hypnosis sessions, but some of the like interviews post hypnosis where he's just kind of giving a general interview on a TV show or something. The way he likens it is kind of like if you or I found an animal in the wild and like you just picked it up to show your kid, like, oh, look, they got big ears so they can hear well.
You kind of manhandle it and you're not exactly respectful or whatever.
Well, it's that, but it's like the word he used was indifference, which I thought was accurate. Like, you don't mean any harm to a bird if you pick it up in the forest to show your kids. But yeah, you probably are being rougher than you should be, right?
Yeah.
Just because you're clumsy as a big dumb monkey on this earth. But yeah, he described their tone or the kind of their interaction as indifferent to him. They're really just kind of going through the steps of checking him out. Do we want to get on the cups on his junk? We're going to leave that for people to just read about in Wikipedia.
Let's just briefly go through it, but it is an important part
They
of the
also
story.
wanted to check out his fertility, so they put a cup between his legs, and he surmised that they took a sample. We'll leave it at that.
Not pleasant. Those,
No.
But also like we would treat
Pertinent
animals
information.
If we were studying an animal in the wild, you're going to study a male and a
blood,
female, and you're going to take some samples.
Hair
and you're
samples,
gonna, I mean, but I can understand why Barney didn't like the experience at all.
They probably going to need to sedate me if you plan on.
Yeah, I don't think I would
some
voluntarily
kind of stunt like that.
take this cup. No, thank you. Unless you put me in a trance, probably not going to happen.
So, yeah, kind of as you've alluded to, these hypnosis sessions, Betty's are relatively pleasant, but Barney's are pretty emotional. Yeah.
Are there recordings of it? I feel like I listened to it a while back.
Yeah, I didn't pull them up on YouTube, but I heard clips of them.
He's very upset. He's screaming like a terrified kind of, which seems about right. I mean, you think, I think any of us would be terrified. You would be terrified if.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you'd be more terrified because you're in a trance too. Like, I think that they reasoned with her, and maybe that's a shame that, like, if they had treated him nicely, he might have been more okay with it. I don't know.
It's winning hearts and minds, man. That's always more effective. Can't just go in there.
Yeah, but I think my interpretation of it is a lot of it was just the violation of it, like not being able to like stop them, not being able to control yourself.
Well, particularly, you're a man, and if you're bigger than the average man, and it's you and your wife out on a trip or wherever, your job's to protect her, and now you're getting put in this trance or whatever. And
weirdos.
Yeah, not only are you concerned for your own safety, but you're probably feeling, demoralized by the fact that you can't protect your family. You're terrified. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty harrowing experience.
Which makes sense why, his thing when they came back was he didn't want to talk about it. Like, it was not a pleasant experience for him, and that really does line up with, that's how you would feel. Like, it makes sense. Like, both of their interpretations of it just seem, if you listen to their interviews, just seem very believable. If you think about, like, what's the story and how would you react in that situation? To me, anyway, that's one of the things I really like about it, is it just seems very, that feels about
If I got bullied by some aliens, I wouldn't go bragging about it to anybody. Yeah.
I mean, I would even say, I'll go on record saying, and I don't know if I saw aliens. I'm just saying that the first time that I saw a UFO, I did see a UFO, and I'll tell that story one day. But the first time I did, honestly, my first gut reaction was to not tell people about it. Like, you do feel this tension where you're like, they're going to think I'm crazy. And all I did was see lights in the sky. I don't know what I saw. Like, it wasn't like I did not have a Betty and Barney Hill abduction situation, but I did see lights in the sky that I can't explain. But even just a slight variation from normal behavior, there's a part of you that's like, I just don't feel like, because you just wonder, like, well, what are people going to think of me?
you're a person of color married to a white woman in the 60s, you got enough heat on you as it is. You don't need to come out with some alien story.
Then you're you're the alien guy. Ugh. Which they did become that. Like they ended up doing like the public circuit. Yeah. They were on talk shows and it became a movie. I mean, it was a very big story back in the day.
Seems like I mean, Barney only lived a few number of years after this.
Yeah.
But Betty definitely went on to be a more public figure. At some point, I think they referred to her as the grandmother of UFOlogy, right? I mean, what else? Let's see. Yeah, the thing that's noted here in the Wikipedia is just that the accounts between Barney and Betty are similar. I mean, you can probably hear between the two of us, it's not identical, but there's
that actually
parallels.
Plays a bit into the believability of it, because if you listen to there's a lot of psychology experts that study like crime scenes and witness testimony to events, and that's actually an indication that people are telling the truth. If you have an event where everybody tells a cookie cutter exactly the same story, it's some sort of colluded. Yeah, like we've all talked about this, got on the same page. You actually look for slight variations. So I did my own study on this. Somebody I know claims to have seen a UFO actually very close up back in the 90s. And his brother was there at the same time. And so when he told me about it, and the part of the story was, and my older brother was there too. And so I was skeptical, and he said, well, you can call him up and you can talk to my brother. He'll tell you the same thing. So then shortly after that, I was somewhere where his brother happened to be there too, and they hadn't talked about it. And so I pulled him aside and said, I hadn't talked to you about this story your brother told me. And I could tell they had not talked about it, and it's not something he had thought about in a long time. But when he retold the story to me, it was very similar, but had variations, which actually made it more believable.
Sure,
so my friend said he saw green lights, and I think his brother said they were blue. But it was enough of a variation that you're like, it doesn't sound like they've colluded on this story. I think it's been, a couple decades, and they remember it slightly different. And so I think any of these stories, that's kind of what you look for, is something where it's like that plays into the believability, I think.
No, I don't disagree with that. I think if you and I experience something, whether it be a UFO encounter or just any kind of daily deal,
or even remember that gig back what
that guy said, there are going to be things that jump out to you. Let's say it's some kind of fiasco at a gig. There are going to be things that jump out to you as the front man. I was trying to remember words, that guy knocked a table over, that are not going to be as specific to me as like a guy on the side of the stage. You know? So there are going to be details that are more prevalent in your memory.
So
just to tie it up with the hypnosis piece, Dr. Simon's conclusions, Wikipedia just says that he speculated that Barney's recollection of the UFO encounter was possibly a fantasy inspired by Betty's dreams. Simon thought it was the most reasonable and consistent explanation. Barney rejected this idea, noting that while their memories were consistent in some regards, there were also portions in both of their narratives that were unique to each other, which is to
it's
your
a believable
point.
Story.
One of the comments I heard on the fact that the hypnotist that performed these sessions, he in the end kind of goes, well, I think they imagined this. The rebuttal to that was, well, we're talking about, we hadn't even gone to the moon yet. This is before we're out in outer space, or had not gone to the moon yet. But the point is, just like most doctors or most officials would even today, if you came to them with a story like this, you're likely going to give some kind of well, I wasn't there, I didn't see them go in a spaceship. Safe bet for me to say, it's probably some kind of a
well,
dream.
And in light of, even this story itself, it kind of all goes back to 2016. Like that was the year that I was like, something's going on, because since 1947, when Roswell happened, or allegedly happened, there's been a back and forth with everything from the Phoenix Lights incident to Betty and Barney Hill to the Ariel School, case to modern day, to me, seeing something over my house. I think that where we are now, where it's like the president of the United States was talking about UFOs just a few weeks ago, and senators and congressmen are taking this subject seriously all since 2016, when there was the New York Times published a piece about several videos that were posted leaked from the Pentagon, showing what they were like. These, we don't know what this is. There's stuff we're catching on our radars, stuff we're seeing in the sky. We don't know what it is. And so I could see back being in 1961, maybe a little skeptical, but now hundreds, maybe thousands of witness testimony and, things going on all the way up to now. You have serious politicians talking about it. You kind of have to look back at some of these cases and go, well, maybe there, if the president today is talking about UFOs, maybe they were coming here in 1961 and in 1947 and 1952, and maybe even all the way back to Jesus Christ. Who knows?
Well, yeah, I mean, now back to 60 years is not a long time as far as like light years go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a relatively short period of time. It's not crazy to think that if aliens started showing up 60 years ago, then yeah, most likely 120 years ago, 240 years ago, back and back. So I'm with you.
But you think, that same that same psychiatrist might have a different opinion looking at the headlines of the news today. Mm-hmm. And still, we don't have a lot that's verified, except that a lot of fighter pilots, a lot of radar operators, our buddy, even who's a pilot. I mean, people are, starting to open up to this idea that maybe something's been going on that we don't really understand.
It really helps the credibility when it is a fighter pilot or just a pilot in general. And any kind of documentation. I mean, that sort of goes without saying, but again, if I'm a psychiatrist and this couple is telling me this stuff and they were just out on a dark country road by themselves in the middle of the night, there's not a lot to corroborate that, right? Whereas, when a very vetted pilot is telling you, well, I know it wasn't another plane, and I know it wasn't stars because I know where those are, and I know it wasn't this, that, or the other thing. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't all the things we normally get to blame this on. Yeah.
It's pretty wild. I love this story. I love the movie, even though it's not a great movie. I love listening to interviews with Betty Hill. I think that what exactly happened to them, obviously I don't know that. I just know their story, and I know it, like I think I said on the last podcast, they were kind of the first ones to come out with a story like this. Mm-hmm. And that a lot of these stereotypes about these stories, there's some similarities, you know what I mean? And it's like, well, they were the first to come up with it, or they actually experienced it.
Yeah.
And
they did set the template.
It's kind of like Bob Lazar. Like if Bob Lazar would do his story later too, but if Bob Lazar wanted to, he could probably be an incredibly successful science fiction writer if he just took his whole story and made books out of it. But either he experienced what he said he experienced, or he came up with all these concepts that went on to be kind of the plots for a lot of novels and books that were novels and movies that were very successful. He could have made a lot of money off that, but he didn't. So, I mean, either way, that to me makes it interesting. I think they were, like, as far as we know, as far as like alien abduction stories, Travis Walton kind of things, like they were the first one. So at least first public one that we really know about.
There's another one a few years prior to Betty and Barney Hill in Brazil, not as highly publicized. This Betty and Barney Hill is kind of the flashpoint before you start to get, like you said, this surge in the standard sort of flying saucer grays, and then getting abducted and checked out by these alien doctors Or maybe not doctors, maybe just
Maybe
clumsy-handed aliens just checking things out, showing their kids.
Yeah, dicey. Well, that's about all I have on it. I mean, it's a fascinating story. I say check out the movie. I think you can watch it for free on YouTube. I think I watched it, at least used to be able to.
Okay.
And it's cool to see James Earl Jones as just a young actor.
It is cool.
Definitely check out The Ballad of Betty and Barney Hill. It's the best
That's
abduction
even cooler
song
than
ever
James
written.
Earl Jones.
And I should cut a version of that using old footage from the movie.
Ooh,
It's like a music video.
That's awesome.
I wonder if I could do that and like claim some sort of copyright fair use. I'd have to say something historical, I think, or educational.
Just text Barack and have him ask James Earl Jones if you can use.
What if they get James Earl Jones to narrate White Mountain?
Oh, that would be
and
great.
they use my song in the soundtrack, and you hear James Earl Jones talking
over
with my
your
song
voice
in the background.
Yeah.
That'd be a heck of a turn in the simulation. Just saying. Just saying, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us, guys. Please like, share, subscribe, do all the things you do to podcasts. We appreciate everybody listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Dave.
Right on.